And our thoughts and prayers are with the family of those who have departed. Let's switch gears now and turn our attention to the occupied Palestinian territory and the Israel-Hamas war, where at least 42 people have been killed in airstrikes near Aleppo in Syria. We understand the military is blaming the strikes, which occurred at about 2 a.m. early hours of this morning, on Israel. UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights believes the targets were weapon stores used by Hezbollah, adding that 6 Hezbollah fighters and 36 Syrian soldiers are among the dead. In the meantime, authorities say a separate attack was carried out on a car in the southern Lebanon in the early hours of today, killing an Hezbollah official. Now, since the outbreak of the Syrian civil war in 2011, Israel has launched hundreds of strikes on Syria, mostly targeting groups allied with Iran. Hezbollah has also launched repeated rocket bombardments against Israel from southern Lebanon. However, Israel has not commented on these latest attacks. And staying with the attacks, Iran has strongly condemned the overnight strike in northern Syria, saying it is a clear violation of international law and regulations. The country's Foreign Minister spokesperson Nasser Kanani says the strike is a violation of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as a serious threat to regional and international peace and security. He indicated the actions were a blatant and desperate attempt to continue and expand the crisis in the region. And Iran is calling on international community and the United Nations Security Council to condemn the attacks and take measures to hold Israel accountable. In the meantime, the Israeli military says it is continuing operations at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza and central Gaza in general. A statement on social media platform X said soldiers backed by warplanes killed fighters and located weapons and military infrastructure in the area. The soldiers also reportedly destroyed a number of rockets in the area that were aimed at Israeli territory. Elsewhere, the death toll from an Israeli strike on a sports center in the Shuhar region, a neighborhood of Gaza, has risen to 15. Overnight attacks have also killed 12 people from the same family in Rafah, while 7 people have been reportedly killed at the Makhazi refugee camp, which has become the site of relentless artillery shelling. We can also confirm to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world that fighting is continuing between Israeli forces and Palestinian fighters near Nasser Hospital in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis. The health ministry in Gaza says over 32,000 people have been killed and over 75,000 others injured since the October 7 attack. And checking with more updates from the world, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to enable the unhindered flow of aid into Gaza in order to avert a possible famine in the region. A unanimous decision by the UN top court indicates that Israel had to act without delay to allow the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. This follows warnings that famine could hit Gaza within weeks. Meanwhile, Amnesty International says the ICJ's order demonstrated Israel's failure to comply with previous orders by the court. However, Israel has described the allegations it is blocking aid as, quote, wholly unfounded. And Japan says it is preparing to resume funding to the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency, which coordinates the vast majority of aid to Gaza. This comes after more than a dozen countries paused funding to the agency after Israel claimed that 12 on UNRWA's staff were involved in the deadly October 7 Hamas attack. According to Japanese media, the resumption of funding, which was suspended in January, was expected to come in the first half of April. This month, Australia, Canada, and Sweden, among other countries, have also announced they were resuming humanitarian aid to Gaza. A spokesperson for the agency said the agency's capacity to operate in Gaza is diminishing due to Israel's refusal to cooperate with the aid agency. But as unpacked all of these very latest developments in the last 24 hours in the region. The view is Ricky Rossen joins us live from Tel Aviv. Ricky, good to see you again. Let's begin with the airstrike on northern Syria. Any word yet if Israel has claimed responsibility or made any comment about these attacks?
No, as is typical in these attacks in Syria, the Israeli military has not claimed responsibility. It's obvious that attacks on Syria and also Lebanon have originated from Israel, but Israel would not claim responsibility for it.
And the Gaza's health ministry says we're also getting figures that about 71 Palestinians have been killed and 112 wounded over the last 24 hours reporting period. What else are you hearing?
Israel has, despite the fact that the UN Security Council issued the resolution last week demanding an immediate ceasefire, Israel has continued its attacks both in Rafah and in southern Gaza, and also in the Shifa hospital operation, in a way to send a signal that they don't respect the UN resolution because they consider it one-sided in that it doesn't condemn Hamas or demand the release of Israeli hostages. So Israel is reserving the right to continue its attacks despite the demand that it engage in an immediate ceasefire.
Mm. And I wonder perhaps, Ricky, what the possible consequences would be for Israel.
Of going against the UN Security Council resolution?
Absolutely.
It's apparently a non-binding resolution, which means that there weren't sanctions attached this time. But the U.S. Abstained, and there is the fear that if Israel doesn't coordinate its actions more with the U.S., Prime Minister Netanyahu had promised to send a delegation to Washington to discuss an upcoming operation, full military operation in Rafah, but he canceled that after the U.S. Did not veto this Security Council resolution. And they are saying that with the deterioration of relations between the U.S. and Israel, the next time there is a Security Council resolution, it may in fact be binding and be accompanied with sanctions, and Israel will have no choice but to comply with it.
Ricky, the Al-Shifa hospital has been under siege for over a week now. How dire are things in the hospital and around the hospital?
Well, according to Israel, Israel declared that Shifa Hospital had been cleared of Hamas fighters back in January when they declared an end to the fighting there. But they say that fighters from both Hamas and another militant group, Islamic Jihad, have come back to the hospital, and they've shown evidence of hundreds of people that they've arrested, many of them armed, and they've arrested, as I said, hundreds of fighters, and they say that they have released the people who are bona fide doctors and nurses and workers at the hospital. They just announced the killing of one of the senior Hamas commanders who was trying to escape into the hospital. And Israel wants to, they say that they want to prevent Hamas from regrouping in the northern and central parts of Gaza, including the area of Shifa Hospital, which the army already stated was clear of Hamas fighters, and they don't want people to come back, probably through the tunnel network. They got back into the hospital compound.
All right. So we understand that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told relatives of soldiers held in Gaza that only military pressure will secure their release, and that the IDF is preparing to invade Rafah. Do you think this incursion could be ruled out?
Well, Netanyahu has told the families of all Israeli hostages, both civilian and military, for months that only military pressure will convince Hamas to release hostages. But this hasn't worked for the last 4 months since the first and only hostage release, which was done through negotiation. So at least many of the hostage families are insisting that they're demanding more intensive negotiations for the hostage release rather than military actions, which could in fact endanger the hostages who are believed to be being held in tunnels underneath Rafah. And so if there was a major operation, the hostages themselves could be killed or wounded and endangered.
And walk us through the influx of humanitarian aid. We know that Israeli authorities inspected and transferred about 205 trucks to the Gaza Strip. Has this latest delivery been confirmed?
According to Israel, there were 205 trucks, and 195 trucks actually made it through Gaza to be distributed. The problem is that Gaza is basically lawless, and the police who accompany these aid distribution trucks have been targeted because Israel claims that they work for Hamas, and aid distribution routes have been bombed. Israel claims that today, in fact, between 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they paused all fighting in the Rafah area in order to allow for the trucks to get in, and that they just this week opened a new border crossing in the northern part of Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis is really most acute, and allowed in 100 trucks during this week just into northern Gaza.
And earlier, Ricky, we reported to our viewers on the ruling of the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to provide unhindered delivery of aid to Gaza. But some say that it is not likely to increase the amount of assistance flowing into Gaza unless a ceasefire is possibly reached. What do you say?
As I just said, the Israel claims and provides evidence that they have, in fact, inspected and allowed trucks of aid to get in. Also, there have been airdrops of aid and aid coming in by sea. But the fact that once it gets into Gaza, so much of the infrastructure throughout the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. So trucks can't make it to the distribution warehouses. Warehouses themselves, at least half of them have been bombed and destroyed. And there's also many reports of looting, and that people who are desperate have seized aid and are trying to sell it for outrageous prices. And it's basically a lawless situation that without a ceasefire, the orderly distribution of aid can't possibly be carried out.
And the World Food Program says there's an impending risk of famine in the north. And this could possibly be the breaking point for thousands of civilians in the Gaza Strip. I wonder just how will people get to cope and survive, especially mothers and children, if indeed we get to see a famine in the Strip?
Well, according to reports from Gaza, people spend most of their time desperately searching for sources of food. And as you said, this is especially crucial in the north because most of the infrastructure was destroyed, and it's almost impossible for distribution to be carried out safely with continued gunfire, airstrikes, looting. They say in the north that in about two-thirds of households, people went entire days and nights without any food for at least 10 out of the last 30 days. And parents are going without food in order to save, the tiny amount that they can locate or buy to give to their children. And you can see it explains how people can be so desperate that they would go out into the sea to try to retrieve some of the aid that was dropped there and drown because they didn't know how to swim. But they are so desperate. Perhaps as more and more photos of starving children are published, the pressure on Israel to ease the aid distribution will finally have a greater effect, especially if it's coming from allies like the US and the UK.
And we're learning just a moment ago that Israel's Prime Minister has given a green light to Israel's Mossad and Shin Bet chiefs to restart mediated talks with Hamas. Are you optimistic?
It's hard to say because it's been going back and forth for several months now. And the last word that we heard was that Hamas rejected what they had previously agreed to. According to Israel, the rejection was because Hamas felt strengthened by the Security Council resolution demanding a ceasefire and not attaching it to the release of hostages. But apparently there has, hopefully been some new developments that there is more flexibility coming from Hamas because they closed down the talks, according to the most recent reports, saying that they only agreed to go back to the terms that they had originally demanded. But maybe now they have agreed to some more flexibility, and the Israelis are feeling pressured to also show more flexibility. So it's hard to say in this area of the world with what's going on that it's possible to be optimistic. One would hope so, because each side desperately needs a ceasefire and a release of the hostages.
All right, Ricky, we're also hearing that a senior U.S. State Department spokesperson has in fact been quoted as saying famine is quite possibly even present in certain areas of northern Gaza. And that is a huge reminder to the international community about the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. But we must thank you most kindly for bringing us up to speed with the updates from the region. The view is Ricky Rosen live for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you again, and please stay safe.
Thank you. Pleased to see you.